All right, well, while we get this sorted, I'm going to kind of get in your bio a little bit real quick. Great to see so many familiar faces here. My name is Carson Domey. I'm a senior at UT, and I'm involved with AustinXChange. Tonight, we have the pleasure of having Scott Hickle, who is the co-founder and CEO of Throne, a health tech company developing a first-of-its-kind smart toilet device that brings personalized insights into gut health and hydration into people's daily routines. Guided by the idea that we shouldn't flush away valuable health data, Scott and his team are helping people turn an everyday occurrence into an opportunity for better understanding and improving their well-being. Before founding Throne in 2023, Scott built a broad foundation across engineering, product, and startup operations. He began his career at SpaceX, held product and technology roles at Keller and Williams and Esper, and was a founder of Carbon Zero Financial, and later served as the head of finance at Royal.io, where he was the company's first employee. Drawing on his background in mechanical engineering from the University of Texas at Austin, Scott brings a blend of technical insight and human-centered thinking to Throne's mission of making health an effortless part of everyday life. Beyond that, I'm honored to call Scott one of my best friends. I've known him since just before the Throne journey. So as someone with Crohn's, this has always been a huge passion and interest of mine. I'm so thankful for Scott's friendship and for all the work that he's doing for people in our community. To jump right into it, you grew up in Lubbock, not mentioned in the bio, but studied mechanical engineering at UT. How did those early experiences shape your perspective and prepare you for building something as bold and unconventional as Throne?
So first of all, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you all for being here. So I grew up in Lubbock, Texas, which is about 6.5 hours northwest of here, absolute middle of nowhere. Both my parents are physicians. My dad is a medical device inventor. So going to UT, being raised in a literal medical device lab 10 minutes down the street from my home, I was born to bring this into existence, right? And I can only see that in hindsight, but my whole life I wanted to stay far away from healthcare because my parents are the most freakishly accomplished people you can possibly imagine in the world of healthcare, right? My mom's a geriatrician and a lawyer, and she was general counsel at the hospital in my hometown growing up. And my dad is a cardiac anesthesiologist turned medical device inventor. He has 100 patents, and then he started a healthcare system to compete with the system that my mom was general counsel at. He grew that into two hospitals and 2 clinics and sold that. That was so intimidating. How am I supposed to fill those shoes, right? I was I'm gonna go do engineering and go work at SpaceX. And then I did a summer there and realized I did not actually want to be an engineer. And if I didn't want to do it at SpaceX, there's probably nowhere in the world that I wanted to be an engineer at. And all my friends in tech seem to be having a lot more fun with just fast-paced, non-linear careers. By the time I landed at SpaceX, if you were working there in 2014, they already had 4,000 employees. And you could look forward and see what your life looked like 20 years from now, which is a very exciting life. You're working on very meaningful stuff. But it's the equivalent of working as an engineer at NASA in the 1960s, which is predictable. And I didn't want that. And so I never would have anticipated it would have led me to building, toilet cameras, but here we are.
And I think it leads perfectly into kind of the versatility of your background. You spent time obviously in engineering and product roles, as we already talked about, even a little bit time on Capitol Hill. How has that range of exposure across different industries and environments shaped the way that you approach building Throne today?
So I love that I had a random walk in life, right? To your point, I lived in DC for 2 separate 6-month stints. I worked on Capitol Hill. I have worked in fintech and worked in GovTech and worked in engineering, hard sciences. And this combines, and I should actually take it out here real quick just so I can see what this is, not a box, but a product. This product is the combination of software and hardware, bits and atoms. It's, this is a wellness device, which is a distinct regulatory, classification for it, as opposed from a medical device. So just being conversant and fluent in regulation and not intimidated by that stuff all goes into making and crafting what we have here.
I'm gonna pivot a little bit with this question, but want you to kind of lead into starting Throne, but kind of going off of what you've already said. I guess I have to tell a little backstory here. When I was at Scott's birthday party, I think it was 30, I think it was 2 years ago, and he gave a wonderful birthday speech, and someone asked him what his word of the year was, and that word was mojo. And that really stuck with you for the year after, stuck with me. I still refer to it. Can you talk a little bit about kind of combining those experiences you had across different industries and kind of the mojo that it gave you to found Throne?
Yeah, I mean, so the word mojo is like, it's this intangible, it's momentum, it's gusto, it's zest for life. And the thing that I find that this, I'm trying to think. So in all of my career, working in real estate tech, in GovTech after that, then going into FinTech and back into GovTech, it's all meaningful in a very abstract sense, right? Like even working on going to Mars is one of those things is like, it's real, but it's still a decade off, right? And improving, legislative efficiency is real, but in a very I am a very small cog in a very large machine. The thing that gives me so much mojo is that this product has the ability to touch people's lives in ways that Carson is, better equipped and more excited about than I could ever be, right? This product is not only going to improve health in the same way that like a Whoop or an Oura Ring or an Apple Watch would. This has the opportunity to save 50,000 lives a year in the United States alone, and 900,000 lives a year around the world. We're building ultimately the smoke detector for colon cancer, which is the second deadliest cancer in the country behind only lung cancer, and the deadliest cancer that's effectively random. Like lung cancer is 88% correlated with smoking. Very few people with lung cancer are caught by surprise. Colon cancer, everyone's surprised. Like no one expects they have colon cancer unless they have a family history of it, but only 16% of colorectal cancer cases are explained by a pre-existing hereditary syndrome or genetic predisposition. So this is so easy to get excited about, even though it's a toilet camera, it's weird, right? But like even that, there's something magical about it to me, right? It's the taboo, but norms change, right? I say this a lot, like 20 years ago, it was a fucking crazy idea to get in someone's car, a stranger's car. 20 years ago, it was an insane idea to sleep in a stranger's home. And like now, it's like not even an afterthought. Of course you're doing that. Like I think 20 years from now, it would be crazy not to have a toilet camera because having one is more likely to save your life than having a smoke detector.
I love it. I think before we dive in a little bit even more about the product and the different things that are going on at Throne now, I'd love for you to talk about a little bit the pivot from Pineway. Maybe give the audience a little bit of context about that. It was right about when you and I met and kind of shifting from healthcare staffing, developing hardware, kind of what that process was like, how you deal with it. I know it's a big, arduous thing as a founder, and I think being 2.5, 3 years removed from it now, I'm sure there's a lot of clarity and insight on it.
Yeah, so you probably haven't had a pivot yet in your careers or your life, and it is both like the best thing that ever happened to me, but also like incredibly painful in the moment. So what became Throne originally started as a healthcare staffing marketplace, which is Uber for nurses, basically, like very boring. And we started there because my co-founder, Tim, his mom and 3 of his sisters are nurses, and through COVID, they were very vocal about how much healthcare staffing sucked. And all the marketplaces, all the apps treated them like cattle. They were like, I feel like a number. Again, a very small cog in a very large machine. So Tim and I were, well, what if we just went and built a healthcare staffing product that treated people like people? And the idea was, if you build it, they will come. And we were partly right about that. We built a really strong brand. We got, like dozens of nurses signed up within the first couple of weeks of launching. But as we were launching, none of the facilities we were approaching, all these nursing homes and memory care facilities, none of them were signing up. And after about a month of conversations with the ones we were close to, they were telling us like, oh yeah, we're starting to hire full time. And if you're in the business of temp staffing, your competition is full-time staff. And these people were telling us we hadn't hired anybody in 2.5 years, right? Through COVID, it was incredibly hard to make full-time hires. And then things collapsed in early 2023 as COVID was going away. And we learned a lot about, counter-cyclical markets, and healthcare is one of them. The demand for healthcare is pretty steady, independent of economics. But the demand for healthcare staffing, when times are good, everyone, especially the lower rungs of healthcare staffing, like nurse assistants and med techs, they leave healthcare to go make the same money in other jobs that are less arduous. When times start to look dicey, they go back into healthcare because there's always demand for those roles. And so we just looked at the writing on the wall said it does not make any sense to launch a new business in an industry that's shrinking. It's a bloodbath out there. And so we went back to the drawing board and spent 6 weeks. We told all our investors, we had just closed our pre-seed round, and we went back to our investors and told them, look, we're letting the team go, and we're going to go spend the next couple months, thinking about what comes next, and either give you your money back and move on, or you're committing to come to the next thing with us. And we had we were very grateful to have the investors that we had at that time, because all but one came along for the journey with us, and we told them we're building toilet cameras. And, that itself was incredibly emotionally challenging, right? Going for 6 weeks, not knowing what you're doing with your life, but having just raised $1 million is a very stressful, unhappy time.
I want to drill into that a little bit more. Obviously, it's a pretty unconventional idea. I remember literally, having coffee with you and Tim for the, first time since the pivot at Brew and Brew, and, showing me the sketch that we're going to put a camera in your toilet. As someone impacted by Crohn's, I still was like, what? A camera in your toilet? What? I'd love for you to talk before we even dive into some of the metrics that Throne's looking to solve. Just tell the crowd a little bit about how was that experience of the first couple of months of a camera in my toilet? What was that like?
Yeah, so Tim and I Tim's my original co-founder. So now I have two co-founders, Tim, who originally had the idea for Throne back in college 15 years ago, and then John, who previously co-founded Whoop, which is now multi-billion-dollar household name. John came along much later, but he also has IBD, and so it's this perfect intersection of what we're doing. But yeah, back when it was just Tim and I, we didn't know what we didn't know, and the original idea for Throne had been something that he and I had joked about for 2 years. We did not know that toilet cameras, again, it wasn't even a camera at that point. It was this idea of a smart toilet in the abstract. But we called it Throne because that's obviously what you're going to call this product. And fast forward, when we were, in our, 30 days and 30 nights of wandering through the desert looking for manna, one of our friends called and was like, hey, have you guys looked into smart toilets? That feels like something that you could be well suited to. And we're like, dude, we already named that company, that's Throne. But, let's actually do some homework. So I called my mom, the geriatrician, which is, a primary care physician for old people, age 65 up. And I asked her, Mom, is there any medical utility to looking at people's waste? And she lit up. She had so much to say. And, basically boiled down to yes, my patients are obsessed with their gut health. They send me pictures of the poop every single day. I can no longer give my patients my phone number. It's that big of a problem. As you age, your gut motility starts to slow down, and especially in retirement, you are acutely aware of these changes happening to your body, and you just want to talk about it. There's this joke in the field of geriatrics that all old people talk about is their kids, their meds, and their poop. And she went on and on and on, and I was like, whoa, maybe there's a there there. And then, that basically inspired Tim and I to start looking into this more seriously, and pretty quickly realize there are roughly 6 chronic conditions that impact 100+ million Americans, not accounting for comorbidities, that would benefit from continuous monitoring. So you have, 3 million Americans with inflammatory bowel diseases, Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. You have another 35-ish million Americans with IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. About 40 million Americans have chronic kidney disease. About 38 million Americans have benign prostatic hyperplasia. It's 50% of men by age 50 and 90% of men by age 80. So coming for all of this, just a matter of on what time. And then you have the long tail things like celiacs and small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And then there's the big C, right? Colorectal cancer, which, we talk about second deadliest cancer in the country, the deadliest random cancer. And if you're born after 1990, which I'm assuming most of this room was, then you have 4 times the chance of getting rectal cancer and twice the chance of getting colon cancer as someone born in 1950. And yeah, it's basically 4% of the country at today's rates is going to get colorectal cancer at some point in their lives, and 1 in 3 people diagnosed with it is going to die from it. And Peter Tia, the famous longevity doctor, is very vocal about the fact that if everybody got a colonoscopy every single day, nobody would ever die from colon cancer. And there are ways to find it, and we can go into that. But ultimately, looking at all this data of what can we measure looking at the toilet, and what are the biomarkers that you can infer using range sensing, and what are the different conditions that map onto these biomarkers and the patient populations of those conditions. We looked at this, we're like, holy shit, I think we have to do this.
I think something too that I would love for you to maybe get into a little bit as you kind of like break down the product was that research journey of, talking to people. I think that was something, I was fortunate to have a pretty front row seat with you to that, but just mind boggling. I'm sure you've heard 10 times more stories than I have of, people from all the different, diagnoses that we've talked about. But I'd love for you to drill into that a little bit more, just kind of talking about maybe some of the stories that we've heard along the way of just really how impactful this will be.
Yeah, so step one was understand, is there a market for this? And once we convince ourselves yes, there is a market in theory, then there's convincing yourself that there's a market in practice, people will actually install a toilet camera and use it. And so step one was we built a landing page and spent $10,000 on Facebook ads, just pointing them at this landing page and asking, for their email. And we got a bunch of people to sign up for email for this product that didn't exist, with a very hand-wavy value proposition. And, this was a render that we had some guy do for us for $50 on Fiverr. And we were like, holy shit, people are signing up. And then the first thing we do is email each and every single sign up and ask them, what are you hoping to get out of this? Why do you sign up for this thing? And get as many of them on phone calls as we could. And that's when we started learning about these conditions. And then we went and started standing outside of local gyms and the local Trader Joe's down in Seaholm, and just accosted strangers. One with, Tim was holding an iPad, and I was just walking up to these strangers, and we'd survey them with the survey we had. We'd ask them, hey, you're wearing an Apple Watch, or you're wearing an Oura Ring, why do you use your wearable? What are you hoping to get out of that? And then, we lead the conversation down okay, if you could track gut health and hydration, would that be interesting to you? And everyone's like, yeah, of course. And then we ask them okay, now let's say you're doing this with a camera in your toilet facing down. How'd you feel about that? Nobody objected to that. And we were no fucking way. Seriously? And then, it got more serious. We had folks like Carson start introducing us to their communities of people with chronic conditions, and did hundreds of those interviews. And just, it really takes, especially as someone who is not what, in the nonprofit world you would call mission connected, it takes a lot of just, there's pixels on the screen homework, right? Which is helpful, running those surveys and, looking at the demographic breakdown of the people who are responding to your Facebook ads. That's helpful information, but really convincing yourself that there is a human need for this comes down to looking people in the eyes and hearing their stories about why they want this. And so much of people's gut health journeys is just trial and error for years at a time. And why wouldn't you just have objective data to be able to go back and see historically what worked for you and what didn't? And that's a story that we heard hundreds of times.
Let's jump into the product. Really just break the whole thing down. What do people get from Throne? What's the data? Where does it come from? Is it secure?
Yeah. So it is a AI-powered toilet camera, clips onto the side of the toilet, something like that. And every time you go to the bathroom, it knows who you are, hands-free. You don't have to touch it. It really is, we think of this as ambient compute, right? The same way that you don't think about your 8 Sleep mattress if you have an 8 Sleep, or you don't have to think about your Oura Ring or Apple Watch if you use those. That's the experience we're going for here, right? This should be totally automatic. And so we have a proximity sensor here that wakes the device up every time you go to the bathroom. As long as you have your phone on you, which most of us do most of the time when we're in the bathroom, then it recognizes your Bluetooth, and that's how it identifies, Carson versus Scott. Then it turns on. So let me pull it off here. Oh, well, let me see. Yeah, the motion sensor doesn't like when it's not in a bathroom environment, and I've been playing with it, or it might just be dead. At any rate, point is, it turns on and then starts recording the contents of the toilet bowl. You walk out, the motion sensor turns it off once it realizes there's no one in the bathroom. And then we run, about a dozen different computer vision models and acoustic models to understand the basics of your gut health. So we're looking at stool frequency, stool consistency, which is this scale called the Bristol Stool Scale. Those two things alone are diagnostic of IBS or definitional of IBS. And then we're looking at stool volume, stool color, which maps to a bunch of different conditions, stool diameter, and even changes in stool diameter actually, that's one of the earliest signs of colon cancer. And then does it sink or float, which can map to this thing called steatorrhea, which is a problem with the liver and the pancreas. So that's the stool stuff. And we look at hydration, which is also one of those things that there's a lot of literature around how even mild dehydration affects mood, performance, cognitive function. And so actually being able to see your hydration, like, and also it shows up, dehydration shows up in your urine before you feel thirsty, particularly as you get older. So that's kind of a fun one. And like everyone knows, you should drink 8 glasses of water, or whatever it is. But actually seeing that in your data, like 5 minutes after you go to the bathroom, you get a push notification telling you, hey, you're dehydrated. I see a lot of you drinking water right now. That's actually very funny. I love that. But yeah, like it's getting those timely reminders actually makes a difference. And then on the urinary flow side, we use a microphone. And this, like,
that's the part that got me.
This is like booga booga devil magic. Like, this blows my mind that this works. But basically, it is just a happy accident of history that toilets, at least in the United States, have water in them. That is actually not universal, right? Like, toilets in Germany have what's called a shelf. Like, it's literally a poop shelf, so you can look at your stool and turn around. But like in the United States, we're like, that's gross. And we introduced water to the toilet bowl to mask the smell of your poop when it falls into the toilet. And as it just so happens, the volume, like the sound amplitude of the urine stream going into the water maps 1-to-1 to the urine flow rate. So you can get a curve of your urine flow rate with a microphone. And from that, yeah, it's crazy. And from that, you can integrate that to get urine volume. And so, and like, this is like clinical levels of accuracy. That is like the most accurate thing about this device is this, it was called sonouroflowmetry. And peak urinary flow rate is the #1 metric for prostate health. And so the thing that I'm like so excited about that urologists are like, very excited about for this device is like right now, you only go to your urologist when you are having problems with your stream. And so the analogy I like to use is like, this is the difference between pre-diabetes and diabetes, and BPH versus like pre-BPH effectively. But BPH is benign prostatic hyperplasia. It's this non-cancerous enlargement of the prostate that, that's why it stereotypically, like, grandpa has to wake up in the middle of the night to pee, is because of BPH. And it's coming for all of us. And there are exercises you can do, pelvic floor exercises, Kegels. You can take supplements to, to like hinder the progression of benign prostatic hyperplasia. But if you don't know you have it, and you don't see those signs until it becomes clinically symptomatic, and you have what's called staccato flow, or you're like peeing for minutes at a time because it's just so slow. By that point, you're looking at a surgical intervention or like a catheter, and that sucks. And so this is like, there's a genuine opportunity to improve preventive care and get people onto these lifestyle modifications before it becomes a surgical modification. And then the last category of things that we're tracking is what we call bathroom habits, which is just like the timelines for like how long it takes you from the time you sit down to like the time you have your first movement. And then what's the active evacuation window. And then the final is like the wrap-up time, which is how long you're on the toilet after you're done. And there's some really fun studies that show that hemorrhoid risk, smartphone use on the toilet is associated with a 46% increase in hemorrhoid risk, which is like all of us. Like, I don't know who they're measuring the baseline against, because like, no one doesn't bring their phone with them in the bathroom. But like, that's the kind of thing that, again, like we are now grading you on your bathroom habits, which are like abundantly within your control. But again, like, who has good bathroom habits until they see it? Like, no one.
My favorite graph, which I'm surprised you jumped over, was time. Like when you use the restroom. We literally have a graph, it's a clock, and it highlights like when you use the restroom. And it's fascinating, like when you track it for months, just how like cyclical it is for most people. Real quick, if you wouldn't mind kind of briefly hitting on the blood piece.
Yeah, so the grand mission here is that smoke detect for colon cancer. And basically what that comes down to is looking at what's called fecal occult blood, which is blood that is in your stool but invisible to the naked eye. That's the occult part. When you can see it, it's called overt blood. And colorectal cancer is like this crazy shape of a disease, because every colon cancer starts first as a polyp, which is just like a little pimple on the wall of your colon. And those polyps, outside of like having Lynch syndrome, which is like a very small percent of the population, but on average for most people, it takes 7 to 10 years for a polyp to develop into a malignant tumor. So we have a crazy long window of opportunity to detect it and intervene before it even becomes cancer. And if you catch it before it becomes malignant tumor, you literally cured the cancer before it got off the ground. However, and actually I should say this too, even if you catch cancer once it's become cancer, stage 1, you still have a 91% 5-year survival rate if you get a colonoscopy and get it removed in stage 1. If you catch it as late as stage 3, you have a 71% 5-year survival rate. Only by the time it reaches stage 4 does the survival rate plummet to 16%. So that means 16%, basically 86% of people diagnosed with stage 4 cancer are dead 5 years later. And right now, the numbers are 153,000 people were diagnosed with colorectal cancer last year in the United States, and 50,000 people died from it. That is 20% more than 40,000 people died in all car accidents combined in the United States last year.
Say that again.
40,000 people died in all car accidents combined across the entire country, which means that this toilet camera has more life-saving potential than Waymo and Tesla and every self-driving car company combined in the United States. That's like absolutely bananas to me, that this is not a bigger problem that people talk about more. And so going back to what we're doing about this, so we have designed a version of this device that introduces imaging outside of visible light, so incorporating elements of the infrared and ultraviolet spectrums on both sides of visible light, and fluorescence and reflectance. And basically we do a bunch of algorithmic math on the back end, but we take images across like 7 different wavelengths and then add them, subtract them, multiply them, divide them. And basically we're looking for fingerprints of hemoglobin. And what we, again, these are very early results, but the current standard of care is what's called a fecal immunochemical test, FIT test. And that is sensitive to on the order of 10 to 20 micrograms of hemoglobin per gram of stool. The naked eye, it becomes overt at about 40,000, 50,000 micrograms per gram. So the FIT test is, about 1,000 times more sensitive than your eye is. We're looking at 1,000 times more sensitive than the FIT test and about 80 million times more sensitive than the naked eye. And the thing that I'm so excited about for that is right now, if you take a FIT test, first of all, you have to take a stool sample, send it into a lab. It's fucking gross. People hate doing it. The return rate on FIT tests, Aetna, the big health insurance company, sends out about 1 million FIT tests a year. And the return rate on those FIT tests is on the order of 5%. It's horrible. If a doctor prescribes you a test, Cologuard is the one they prescribe, the return rate on those is about 66%. So even 1 in 3 people prescribed one of these tests by their doctors because it could save your life still won't do it because it's gross. Now, the positive reading of this, though, is that with probable cause, right, your doctor telling you should do this, you're 10 times more likely to actually follow through with it. About 12 times more likely. So the thing that I'm excited about is that by looking at every sample every single day, we can not only identify blood, but the patterns of blood. Because we're also estimating the concentration or the intensity of that bleeding. So we'll be able to say, okay, this was a transient phenomenon, so this could probably be a hemorrhoid and is much less critical than if we see a monotonic increase in the bleeding pattern over the course of 2 or 3 months. And that's when we should throw up a big red flag and say, go talk to your GI and show them this data immediately. We're not diagnosing you, but you should get a colonoscopy or at least elevate this to a Cologuard test or a FIT test or something else. But that will genuinely save tens of thousands of lives in the United States alone.
All right, we're going to zoom out a little bit from the product and talk about leadership for a second. But before we do that, we're going to have opportunity for y'all to ask questions, so start thinking of those now. I've really always admired the way that you treat, honestly, everyone that you meet, but particularly, getting to know you first kind of in the professional setting and then as a friend. And it's something that I've found you to be the same person very much in both, which I don't know if you always see that in people. And whenever I introduce you to folks, what always sticks out is your passion for this. I'd love for you to talk to the group a little bit about, do you have somewhat of a philosophy for either how you approach the mission or how, you lead the growing team at Throne? Because I think it's certainly impressive.
I appreciate that. So one of my best friends has this phrase that enthusiasm is the language of the universe. I think that's completely true. You just listen more to people who give a shit about what they're talking about. And I'm very lucky that I fucking love what I do. And I don't know that there's much more to leadership than just, caring a lot about what you do and then caring a lot about who you work with. And that's the other thing. We have a very small team. Right now our team is about 8 people full time. And I've had to let go of 6 people to get here. And that sucks, but that's my biggest job as a leader, is making sure that the team is all A+ world-class players. And if you're not, like, this is something, you know, again, being raised by a founder and an entrepreneur, like, I'm very fortunate to have these lessons imparted to me from a very young age. This is something that my dad has lectured me about for, you know, since I was knee-high to a bee, is you tell yourself, you tell your investors, you tell your team that we're building a world-class team. And then if you hire everyone believing that this is in addition to this world-class team, you don't offer people to join your team unless you sincerely believe that. But not infrequently, you're wrong. And when you're wrong, you either have to let them go or accept the fact that you're a fucking liar. That's really hard. But I feel so strongly about the people that we've attracted. And, like, you know, we had a previous co-founder that we let go of. But only because we let go of that previous co-founder, we were able to bring the fucking co-founder of Whoop onto the team. Like, what? Like, he co-founded Whoop and is also on the national board of the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. Like, I couldn't have written that in a script. That's crazy. And it just comes down to, like, being able to make the hard decisions and have the hard conversations. Like, because the rest of it's easy. It really comes down to those critical moments that shape the playing field for everything else.
I didn't have it on here, but because it's so recent, it's such a good story. Can you quickly talk about recruiting John?
Yeah, so John from Woo, met him as an investor originally. He wrote a small angel check. 6 months later, he was, like, very involved as an angel investor and taking a lot of our calls, and we were very grateful for that. So we offered to make him an advisor to get him, you know, even more on the hook. And then we were planning our fundraise last October, and I was having a strategy call with him. You know, we should talk to these funds and not that fund. And he was like, oh yeah, you know, this fund over here is recruiting me to be a general partner. And I was like, you're in the market? Like, are you looking for a job? And he's like, yeah. He's not happy. He'd already left Whoop at that point. I was like, is there a world in which you would come work with us at Throne? And he was like, maybe. So I called Tim. I was in SF at the time, and Tim was here in Austin. I was like, meet me in Boston tomorrow. We are going to see John and pitch him on joining us. And so John very graciously, you know, opened his doors to us and cooked us lunch and then sat us down. And he was like, guys, like, I don't have another 0 to 1 stage startup in me right now. Like, this offers like $1 million a year to do very little work. And that sounds really nice. I was like, fair enough. You know, like, can't argue that. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take, and at least we shot our shot. Fast forward, 5 months later, I get a call from him on a random Tuesday. He's like, I just got out of the hospital. I was in with another flare from my UC. My heart rate spiked up to 220 for like an hour. I thought I was going to die, and, you know, it finally came down. And, you know, doctors and nurses are coming by. I was in bedridden for 3 days in the hospital, and everyone's coming by and, you know, striking up small talk. And what do you do? And I talk about Whoop and talk about this other company he was working at the time. He was like, but really, like, all I wanted to talk about is Throne. And, like, we skip over those things just so I can get to talk about Throne. And, like, this is what I care about. And, like, if there's any hope that what you're doing can help prevent people in the future from suffering like I've suffered, that's what I want to dedicate the next chapter of my life to. And what would it look like for me to come on and join full time? And that was the shortest negotiation of my career. We both said yes to the first numbers each other throughout, and we've been working shoulder to shoulder ever since. And it's just, you know, the way we describe it is like, I had to go fundraise for all of Q4 last year. And it's like, when one of the two co-founders goes out to do that, it's like you're flying a plane and you just lost a jet engine. Like, you're not losing altitude, but you're not gaining altitude. And then immediately after we closed the raise, then my co-founder Tim, my CTO, went out and had to recruit and build up the team. And so, like, you know, one engine came back online just in time for the other one to go out. And again, like, you know, things are moving along, but then we got the whole team hired up, and then John called, and now we got like two jet engines and a jetpack. It's awesome.
All right, we are gonna wrap with one question here, and if you want to ask a question, feel free to. I think we're gonna use the back mic up here, so if you want to just kind of start lining up, if you want to ask a question as we kind of wrap with this. What's next for Throne?
Yeah, so we're launching in February. So we've been building this product that I am incredibly proud of for the last 2.5 years. This is, you know, the third iteration of this device. Like, the previous ones were not hands-free. We're not nearly as accurate. We're not waterproof, which is actually a huge problem, as you can imagine. We lost a lot of devices. Good soldiers. And yeah, so we're launching, you know, beginning of February. You know, we just brought on our chief of science, who's the biggest gastroenterologist on the internet, has like 11 million followers. So we're building up like the most elite team for the launch of something that like I genuinely believe will change the world. And then on top of that, we're also, marching towards the next version of this device. We're already developing that, all those stats I quoted from the lab, but like we're working on the next version of this that is really the smoke detector for colon cancer. And so that's going to have to go through FDA, and that'll be probably a 5-year journey, but that's where we're headed.
And shameless plug, Scott is a top 3 Twitter follow. Make sure you follow him. Great content. Follow Throne. Subscribe to their newsletter. Device pre-orders ship in February 2026 if you're looking. $300?
$320 now, $400 MSRP. So,
There you go.
save
All
that
right.
money.